celebrating 24 years since the release of Medarot 3 with a specialized, souped-up version of everyone's favorite and well-known iconic nightly member of the Stag Beetle family. It is KWG-05M Dorcus C, with a completely brand new kit across the board of Radar Sight C, Sword C, Hammer C, biped legs, and a brand new leg ability called Lightweight, which buffs all leg stats, minus armor and heavy limit, if the leg's heavy limit is not exceeded. Now, even though I said it is technically a brand new kit, and by all technicalities it really is, it more or less, much like it was with Saikachi C, basically just a souped up version of the commercial Dorcus model that has been currently available in the game basically since the launch of Medachange, when that was first implemented as a mechanic. And a lot of the perks that Dorcus C brings to the table on all three of his skills, minus of course his leg ability, are all perks that were originally only available if you were able to farm all the way up for tune-up bonuses on the commercial Saikachis or Dorcus models. And Dorcus C in particular is most certainly no exception to that rule either. Radar Sight C is a support skill that once activated is basically Radar Sight, which is simply a 50% boost to success, negation of conceal or stealth effects on the enemy side to all allies, but instead of it being the 50%, you instead get a 120% boost to your success rate. So if you weren't already highly likely to land hits and crits already, Dorcus C already makes it very clear that once this is activated, you'd have to really hit somebody who is guaranteed to dodge everything in order to even be proven wrong, because 120% boost is incredibly noticeable, and as a friendly reminder, success ties your hit rate and your crit rate together into one stat. So the higher this is, not only are you more likely to land the hit, but it also becomes immensely painful on top of that. Sword C on the right arm is basically just a conventional sword skill, nothing special, no drawback or weakness, but much like it was with Saikachi C rifle, Sword C gets that 30% piercing bonus, damage bonus when piercing attacks and breaking parts on the enemy. So much like it was similar to Rokusho A with the anime variant, that got a 50% bonus, it's going to be relatively the same thing here, but just not necessarily as aggressive. But with the base power already in the mid-1500s, it's still a very well-rounded and very conventional sword skill that you really can't go wrong with using. And just to talk about the heat and cool real quick, and the mid to high 700s and the success in over 1200, this is a sword skill that's going to have a really hard time missing and even being caught on the slow end, because it's a very well-rounded attack all around. Left arm of Hammer C is also just a conventional melee skill with a souped up bonus. Essentially, it's your basic hammer, which is an AoE skill, attacking all parts and equalizing the damage across all of them, but it also supposedly gets a higher rank up bonus. So, relatively similar to Saikachi C Missile C attack, Hammer C will get roughly the same treatment. So, even though it will behave just like any other basic hammer attack will, Hammer C gets a little bit more of an extra kick to it if you put in the effort and investment into raising it as high as you can. Naturally, once you get it to at least 5 or 6 star, then you'll start really seeing that bonus cooking. However, I do have to note that while it is still a really solid attack at a almost base 1900 power, and its heat and cool in the mid to high 600s isn't too shabby either, a success of almost barely 700 is kind of blind. So you probably won't be hitting to anything too consistently with this unless you make use of Radar Sight C first. But if you're using Dorcus C as a pure set, you would be capitalizing on that anyway. Biped legs, of course, means that Dorcus C will have a really solid coverage across most terrains and a pretty well-rounded coverage at that with terrain matching. But also, much like it was with Saikachi C to commercial Saikachis, Dorcus C also kind of packs on some of the weaknesses that commercial Dorcus was falling behind on. One of which primarily being his speed factor. Now, trading, of course, B-Loader for lightweight, he is going to be most certainly getting a very high bonus and high perk to all of his leg stats overall. With a base speed at 883, he's already off to a very solid start and kind of par for the course with Stag Beetle types focusing on speed and agility. And on the topic of agility, with a base evade of over 1200, he also will have a pretty solid time dodging or grazing incoming attacks. A melee resist of 1446 is also very good, as he can certainly hold his own up close and personal, and a shoot resist of 841 isn't terrible, but just make sure that you can avoid using any shooters avoid fighting any shooters when using Dorcus C, or in particular just making sure that he's well protected. But that's also before considering lightweights into the equation. Now, the wording on lightweight was a little strange. It was explained as if the heavy limit is not exceeded, but it also is led to wonder if it's for like every heavy slot that's not met, or if the heavy limit is not met at all, or if it's just as long as it's not exceeded past the limit of the legs. Of which, in any of those three situations, it's going to be a very relatively easy bonus to capitalize on, and it can be very profitable if under any of those three conditions, depending on how the numbers look once he does officially hit the game, at least as a pullable model anyway. And that boost to his leg stats, I believe it did say roughly about 11 to 12%, but likely as an additive thing. So likely if there are more non-heavy parts that are equipped that don't exceed it, it's probably a higher bonus. But already he has some really solid leg stats, and being able to go higher than that is going to be only an added bonus towards Dorcus C's advantage. He's still very well-rounded, pretty speedy, and very crafty with all three of his bonuses, with all three of his parts. And the extra perks he get are, again, relatively similar to what you'd expect of TP bonuses, just without the effort of actually having to farm for those bonuses. Now, much like it was with Saikachi C, Dorcus C also is capable of meta-changing, not into the four-legged quadrupedal Stag Beetle that he was in the commercial model, but instead capable of a crafty mode, similar to how Saikachi C. In this mode, he exchanges his kit out entirely for a new skill called MedaShears, alongside Drive B and C of Jet Blow and Jet Hammer, exchanges his legs for Float and his leg ability of High Fly, which buffs all leg stats minus armor and heavy limits, but also increases the damage taken from gravity skills by 2.5 times. Now, this mode in particular is where Dorcus C is really going to be cooking with his damage and his output, in contrast to Saikachi C, which definitely rounds out more for an all-roundedness, but not really packs anything that that you could survive with or without. MedaShears is a brand new skill and the second ever special skill that actually has a combat stat to it, meaning it actually deals damage. More or less, it's basically just anti-air and anti-sea rolled into one. So instead of having to pack two different types of skills, you'll now have just one skill under the belt that is available and compatible with any metal of any type and any nature, and because it's a special skill, it also can bypass any traps that try to catch Dorcus C on the backswing or as passive aggression. So something to keep in mind with that as well. Jet Blow is a melee-based skill, which is more or less the equivalent of Long Shot, but melee. And to comment on Jet Blow and Jet Hammer, this is the first instance of these that were available ever since the release of Mazin K with the Go Nagai collaboration a number of months ago. Jet Blow, like I said, is basically just a melee long shot, so the farther away the target is from Dorcus, the more damage it's going to deal, and the passive pierce damage and a base power at almost 2100 is mid 2000 I should say, is also very immensely strong as well for what it brings to the table. Jet Hammer on Drive C is also basically a melee long shot, but instead of being piercing, it is instead an AoE type skill. Now, one other thing to notice about Dorcus C's crafty mode is, unlike it was with Saikachi C, Dorcus C is a little more expensive with his drives. As you see here, MedaShears and Jet Hammer both require CG to use, meaning the only skill you can really use immediately from turn 1 is Jet Blow. And given that Jet Blow and Jet Hammer both are very somewhat reliant on the enemy being far away from Dorcus, you're going to be kind of having a lot of fluctuating damage unless you can really learn to time it right. Float Legs means that he will have an A rank across all terrains, and terrains are no longer going to be a problem for Dorcus in this mode. Getting an A rank across the board, like I said, and of course S rank on Cyber, but also exchanging the ability for High Fly guarantees he's going to be really cooking up some high speed and some high numbers. A base mobility of 805 means he is trading just a little bit of his speed while in this mode, but still in a very nice range of where you'd want to be. His evade will go up at 1304, His melee resist will go down slightly to almost 1300, but his shoot resist will go up notably to almost 1200 as well. So this mode will be very easy, will be much better for him as an all-rounded type of form, especially built for extended survival and extended fights. And that also is not including before High Fly comes to the table, which is about 30% to 32% to every single stat here. Now, the only real problem here with this is the fact that it does increase damage from gravity skills, which is going to be incredibly painful. But given that drive modes in particular don't actually follow the rules of heavy parts or heavy support, I really don't think this is going to be an overall problem for Dorcus C, given that it's just going to hit that break hammer or that break rush or even press or break. They might hit just a little bit harder than normal, but it really won't be anything overly dramatic or drastic in comparison to, say, a High Fly with a heavy limit of 2 or 3, which will be very easily crippled. All this being said, though, as a pure set score, I still have to rate Dorcus C much like I did with Saikachi C, and I'm going to basically emulate his score at an 8 out of 10 across the board for a pure set. He is very well synergetic with himself, and lightweight does tie in very nicely with no heavy parts despite having a heavy limit of 1 on the legs. MedaShears is also very nice as it allows Dorcus to keep his coverage against air and sea type foes, but the ability of Jet Blow and Jet Hammer actually will give him just a little bit more of a competitive edge in terms of dealing damage that actually can be moderately painful if done correctly. And going for float legs means that he's going to essentially negate his terrain incompatibilities almost entirely in this form. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him just slightly lower at a 7 out of 10, also much like I did with Saikachi C. Now, even though you are kind of missing out on the float legs with MedaShears, Jet Blow, and Jet Hammer, it's still not really anything that you can't afford to have or can't afford to live without kind of thing. More or less, they're going to be kind of added bonuses, but still something worth holding on to if you choose to use them. However, the Sword, Radar Sight, and Hammer with the TP perks, even the legs with lightweight as well, are still going to be very solid parts you really can't ever go wrong with using, just as long as you remember to pay attention to what bonuses do what, and of course in contrast to the commercial model of Dorcus instead.